Hello, everyone. I'm Joel Baird, the General Manager of Missoula Community Access Television. I'm here with a special edition of Missoula Live with Michael Moore of United Way. Michael came to Missoula Live last week, and well, he's just got a lot more to say than 6 to 8 minutes would allow, so I invited him to come back for a special edition where we could talk longer. So welcome, Michael. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. And last week, we were talking about Project Homeless Connect. That's our one-day service day where we offer, this year I think we had 76 different services. And anybody who's homeless or at risk of homeless can show up. We were set up in the First United Methodist Church, the library, and the Missoula Children's Theater. It seemed like everything ran super smoothly. This was our 9th year of doing it, and we're fairly accomplished at it now, which is kind of too bad in a way that we would get so good at something we wish we didn't have to do, but we are. And I think we probably had about 400 people come, men, women, children. Everybody seemed to have a pretty good experience there, and I think it was a little bit less, maybe 50 or 60 less people than we saw last year, which we took as a good sign.
Right, that the economy was healthier, people had more self-sufficiency.
Yeah, you never know for sure. It could be the weather, it could be...
Because it's just one day.
There's a lot of vagaries for a one-day thing.
Yeah.
But it was a good day, and we were heartened by the response, and once again we had over 200 people volunteer, and I know, because I kind of personally took it on myself to go around and try to thank every single person. I'm sure I missed a few. But, they all, I think it's kind of a revelation for people that haven't been there before that, hey, I'm not really that far away from being that person.
Yeah. And part of that work, you think, 200 people volunteering, to provide 76 services ranging from dental care to a vet look at a pet to referral for housing. Yeah, so that those 200 people got to interact with the needy in person, which would change maybe their stereotype of what the needy and poor are like. So it has a really good psychological, sociological effect to bring all those people together.
Yeah, and I was just talking with one of my colleagues, Stacy Rye, before I came over, and she volunteered just to be, each person gets a personal volunteer who stays with them the whole day. And Stacy said, I had a young guy, I had a veteran, and then I had somebody who was seemed like very much a street-dwelling person, and she described all these different sort of characteristics and events, and it was 3 very different people. And I think a lot of times when we say the word homeless, we get this one picture of a guy outside the grocery store with a "will work for food" or whatever,
or booze or
sign.
whatever,
or maybe it's a joke or whatever. But we have that stereotype. This is who homeless people are.
Yeah.
But that day, one of the busiest places was the child care room.
Yeah.
And that, that puts the lie to the stereotype.
And I know it's very understandable that people want to think the economic system works and that it's a meritocracy. So if you're down on your luck, it's because it's some fault, some flaw of your own, so that everyone who's poor or in need could, if they just changed the way they were, could get out of that situation. And of course it makes people feel better about their own vulnerability. When I see somebody down and out, I think, well, that can't be me because X, Y, Z.
Right.
So I think we call it blaming the victim, but it has a lot of uses for the viewer of victimhood. Like when I was a kid, I'd read in the paper, couple dies in car accident. Oh, they were coming home late from a party. That's why.
They had to be drinking.
Right. They had to be drinking because it's a less threatening world. If everybody runs around deciding their own fate, they want to be on the street. They want to go couch surfing with their kids or whatever.
Right.
So, I understand why that happens, but to learn that fate plays a role, that the economy plays an extraordinary role.
Just bad luck.
And just bad luck.
One
thing happening after another, like a series of unfortunate events, a medical need, a loss of an wage earner in the home, could change the face of the family for years, right?
Yeah. I think Missoula as a place really can it can put that equation in pretty stark relief, because there's a lot of people. I mean, we're a high housing cost, low wage town.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who, if you really pinned them down and said, how many paychecks are you away from not being in your house? I think a lot of people would kind of sputter and cough. But
It's
maybe
a fragile world.
2.
Right.
Because when you think about it, if I lost my housing and I have to come back in and pay first and last month's rent and a security deposit, come up with $2,000 right off the bat.
Yeah.
Could you do that without a job?
Really hard.
Could you maintain it? Probably not.
Yeah. So just getting in a place becomes really difficult with first, last, and month security. And when you were here before, did you mention that United Way was working on some issues like helping with that situation?
Yeah. So United Way is just one of the groups that helped convene the 10-year plan to end homelessness.
Yeah.
And the 10-year plan to end homelessness got started with a study that actually came out of the Downtown Association in 2010, when it seemed that we had reached sort of a critical mass of the downtown drinking guy.
Yeah.
People were kind of fed up about it, and they said, well, what's the problem? And I think what we thought we would find is that, that was the problem. That downtown drinking guy was the problem.
And there was efforts to kind of like regulate the behavior that came up against the ACLU, like
that was,
no sitting on the ground or
that
no
came up
doing
even
this.
more recently. But that initial survey, it put the lie, and it kind of proves what we were talking about just a little while ago. Yeah, there are those people downtown, but they make up about 10% of the population.
Yeah.
So what we found as we studied the real homeless population of Missoula was that, hey, there's a lot of working families.
Yeah.
Hey, there's a lot of kids.
The working poor. And I've seen some studies, of general differences when confronted by homelessness. Like when guys get in the economic hot seat, they just split, they disappear. And the women, they don't take the children and go out on a corner with like a Maxwell House coffee can begging for money. The women are very good at hiding the crisis of homelessness, of couch surfing, of relying on relatives, of using the homeless shelter for a day or two, kids in tow or whatever, and somehow getting out of the situation, as most working poor people do. They hit that safety net, but they bounce out.
Yeah.
They're not like they're sticking like flies to the safety net.
Yeah, and so that's what we saw as we studied the demographic. And so out of that study came this effort to create a 10-year plan. Nationally, the federal government is asking communities to come up with 10-year plans to end homelessness. They're tying it loosely to some funding out there and not making the threat that you won't get money if you don't have a 10-year plan, but they're encouraging it.
Yeah.
So because Missoula is a fairly progressive place, we got on board with the 10-year plan movement. There were other communities that were 5, 6, 7 years out ahead of us, but we're in the top third of places that actually got moving with the plan.
Right.
So the mayor and county commissioners appointed a task force. That group did about a year of work and research.
Yeah, did a lot of meetings, MCAT covered meetings, like in council chambers.
We had all sorts of public hearings, and then we also had engaged a couple social scientists who were doing sort of their own work and research, and they produced a draft of the plan, and I had come along at United Way about this time, and I wound up being kind of the add-on author to the plan with them. And that plan finally got passed in April of 2013 unanimously by the city council and the county commissioners. And then I was hired to be the coordinator of Reaching Home, Missoula's 10-year plan to end homelessness, in September, sort of the end of September of 2013.
Right, and I just want to say for the people watching, Scott has got up a page that is a Reaching Home from United Way, and maybe you could show that to people. It's like Live United, but it's like a whole information page.
Right, and that page will show you the whole plan as well.
Right.
Which is a 50-something page document, and if you're sleepless at night, this should cure you.
Well, exactly. Or like if people see things and they say, "Oh, that upset me so much," to see that person out in the weather.
Right.
That's a very concrete thing to read, to see how maybe they could fit in. And so
right,
on.
And there's a lot of ways to fit in. So, recently I just sort of wrote up a summary of what happened during this first year. The idea of a 10-year plan that says to end homelessness is pretty audacious.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people say, "Oh, good luck to you." They feel like,
good luck is well
part of
received. We appreciate it.
Really.
We need it. But there's a kind of a work element to that thing, and it's like, okay, Missoula has had a homeless problem, like most places across the United States have had a homeless problem that really came into stark relief at very end of the 70s and the first part of the 80s. That was a time when we deinstitutionalized as a country a lot of people that were mentally ill and had been kept in some sort of institution.
And people thought this was a very good thing.
Yeah, I mean,
you remember Geraldo Rivera's, I grew up right near Creedmoor, which was one, the super location for Geraldo Rivera's expose of abuse in these institutionalized situations. And I know they meant the best thing to say, but that created, a crisis too, because they simply shut down the institutions and released thousands of mentally ill people onto the streets.
And like a lot of things that we do as a country, we have a good first impulse, and then we don't have a great plan to follow up on that. So what happened was you had emergency shelters open not long after that, so places like the POV started popping up all over America. And the idea would be that we'll get them into here, and then we'll figure out something else to do with that population, except we got them in there, and we didn't ever really figure out a great thing to do with them all.
Because there was the notion of group homes, and I know a lot of them were protested in my neighborhood when I was growing up, and that phenomenon occurred. They were like, "Well, mentally ill people, we can't have 10 of them living in a house. They're kids here,
Yeah,
that people didn't want them." Or the phenomenon, what was it called, SROs, single room occupancies, where kind of flop houses would say, "Oh, well, this guy has an IQ of 50, we'll take him on, but we don't have a kitchen here," and so on.
Yeah, but really what we had was another acronym, which was NIMBY, not in my backyard.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm not gonna I don't want to have that place. But so, like right now in Missoula, if you go out and you go back behind the Union Gospel Mission over by the railroad track on the west side, any day over there at lunch, you can encounter 5 or 6 guys who will tell you, excuse me, some version of the same story. I was deinstitutionalized in 1981. I've been riding the train since 1981 between Seattle and Minneapolis. And Missoula is one of my places. And so for them, it's home in a way. They've been coming here for as long as most of us have lived here, probably.
Yeah.
But we've never, so this big group of nonprofits was born out of this whole thing, and we set to serving people, and we served them in kind of a silo sort of way that we served them here and here and here and here. We never really
not much coordination. Nobody really knows what's going on.
Didn't connect the dots very well.
Yeah.
And then we set up a federal revenue stream for these people for the nonprofits to work out of and dip their hands into and make their contribution. And the fact is, everybody did great work, and we didn't get anywhere. We didn't really move the needle. We moved the needle for individuals, and we continue to this day to move the needle for individuals, but we didn't really move the needle much as a country. And then, of course, we saw several different economic downturns during that period, which kind of layered some new classes of people that maybe would have not become homeless in the past. And so most recently, in the downturn that started in 08, communities added a lot of people to the homeless rolls.
Right.
And so that was kind of the beginning of the 10-year plan effort, was like, hey, we're busting our butts, and we still got the same problem. I talked to folks out in Seattle a couple of weeks ago, and they said, we've housed thousands and thousands of people, and yet we got more homeless people than we started with.
Tough.
So, and Seattle is pointed to as they're one of the guiding lights. They're a beacon in the darkness.
And you think Portland as well.
It's like, yeah, man, those guys are rocking it. And then you see that their overall populations are still growing, and, it's hard to say, is that a homegrown problem? Is it an import problem? What's going on there? But in any case, Missoula cast its lot with the 10-year plan movement, and has set about to doing a number of things differently, and obviously trying to keep the best things that we do.
And you can
so
learn,
far.
right, from the other communities
Oh,
that
yeah.
have started the 10-year plan ahead of you. Now you're entering year 2
Yeah,
of the 10-year plan.
You know, one of the first things, I started calling up these homeless coordinators across the country.
Right,
and
say,
said,
how's it going?
hey, what did you do?
What works? What
worked?
doesn't?
And what they told me uniformly was that, here's the deal. You might think that Boise, Idaho, and, you know, wherever, Wyoming, and wherever North Dakota, that those are going to be the solutions that would be most likely to work in your community. And they might be. But it also might be that something that worked in Los Angeles and New York City might be the thing that works in your community. And the overarching thing that they had to say was, you're going to go down a lot of cul-de-sacs, and some of them are going to be dark and doomed, and you're just going to have to turn around and go back out to the street you were on and try something different.
Yeah.
And then some of them are going to be lit up, and it's going to be Valhalla down there, and you'll think, hot dog, I'm glad we picked this one.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we've been, you know. So the first year, you know, we've had some really great successes. So one of the things that everybody says you have to have is sort of a coordinated intake system for homeless people. So right now, if you go to the POB, you got to fill out a questionnaire for the POB. If you go to the food bank, then to get food, you got to fill out a questionnaire there. So as you make your way around, let's say you're going to 15 different places, you're getting 40 different questions at each
Right.
place.
Like if you go to Partners.
Yeah, you're up
Healthcare.
in the 400 to 500 questions, and and there's a lot of people that really have kind of a fatigue with that, and they're just like, you know, I'm over it. I'm over questions. I'm just going to get back in my car and go park over by so-and-so, and nobody's bothering me.
Right.
So, you know, we were fortunate in that Jim Morton over at the Human Resource Council had some money, and he said, well, what if instead of doing what we've historically done with it, which was dole out little bits of help here and there, what if we just take this money and come up with an intake system? And now I'm happy to say we have a program that's called it's the CRIS system, Community Housing Referral Information System.
Nice.
And it is being used, not at every agency, but we're getting there. It usually takes about 2 years to really get these things implemented. So that's a place where we're getting kind of a universal intake, but we're also getting a ton of information on who our people are and where are they going. So we can, you know, if we get somebody in at the food bank and then they show up at the POB and then they show up at the Y and then they show up at Partnership Health, eventually we can kind of track, okay, this person's gotten these services, but boy, what they're really missing is this. Or on the flip side, you know, we get the occasional person that's kind of gaming the system, and we can see, oh, you know, this guy's double dipping on us.
Right, yeah.
And, you know, so you can kind of have a little check and balance on that person.
Do you think there's two flows within that problem? And I'm sorry that I probably interrupted your thought flow on the CRIS, that there are people that are the real face of the working poor, that use the safety net system, dip into it in 1 or 2 bad years or even 1 or 2 bad months, and then they're off and running again as self-sufficient as society should wish them. And then you have your core group. The core group becomes the face of poverty that people see and don't like. That there's this recalcitrance that you just don't know what to do for. I mean, does the 10-year plan look at everyone, the people that bounce out of the safety net and the people that are stuck on the safety net?
Yeah, so I got 2 really good examples of that. So as I mentioned, you know, when we studied the homeless population, we realized pretty quickly that I think it was 46% or 48% of homeless people were employed.
Right.
Had a job. So we know what that means here in Missoula. It means they're going to a service economy job. They're probably getting the minimum wage or not much more. They're probably coming home total with, you know, $1,400 a month.
Right.
Okay.
And spending 30 to 50%
maybe
on housing.
50%. They got kids. They got medical needs. Their kid needs a backpack to go to school. Everybody's got to have clothes. You got to eat. $1,400 doesn't last very long.
Right.
So that person has one upset. Boom, they're out of their housing.
Yeah, medical emergency.
Yeah.
Mom needs some help.
Dad leaves.
Dad leaves.
Whatever.
Right.
And then they're out, and how do they get back in?
Yeah.
So they're looking at that, you know, sort of the $1,800 to $2,100 barrier to get back in. So this year, in an effort to help that population, we had 3 different rental assistance programs, and they ran at Word, at the YWCA, and at the Human Resource Council. About half the money was at the YWCA. And that money was targeted specifically to help people over a 4 to 6 month period and to primarily get them over the hump. So
Right.
pay
To
the
be like a
deposit.
micro loan or something
No,
for the first last?
We wouldn't.
Or grant outright?
They don't
like
have to pay the money back.
Okay.
We're taking a situation where you might be on the street, you might be couch surfing, you might be basement hopping, you might be in grandma's house, whatever
Right.
it happened to be, but you got a family, and you will thrive most, and your kid will thrive most if you live independently in your own house
Yeah.
or apartment or whatever it happens to be. So basically, we took those people and we jumped them over this huge hurdle, which was the upfront money costs.
Yeah.
And then we also helped them through sort of a 4 to 6 month period to make sure, like if they have trouble in month 5 paying the rent, we are asking them to pay a graduated part of their money as the rent as they move toward the 6 months, sort of targeting them.
It's almost like a push system on the stalled car.
It is.
Yeah.
And what it's a move away from, and it's interesting that this didn't work as a national model, was, you know, in the past we had emergency housing, then we would in theory put you in transitional housing where we would subsidize sort of your every move for X number of months or years, and then you would graduate and be on your own.
Yeah.
Well, in transitional housing programs across the country, those people who often were subsidized for a year to 2 years, when they got out and you checked on them a year later, 40% were in houses. So 60% failed.
Yeah.
So what we've learned in the 10-year plan and what we've learned with the federal government pushing us into these shorter helping periods, more like 4 to 6 months instead of 2 years, is that oddly enough, the people that are getting help for 6 months, a year later when you look at them, 80% are still in the house.
Interesting.
It's interesting, and one of the findings that they've come up with about this population is that group said, I stayed and I prospered because I had to spend my own money.
Yeah,
So
so
it's kind
the
of the-
long-term care, just like a conservative might say, nannied the population,
Yeah, it's
right?
kind of the
and
bootstrap
lulled them
argument.
into a kind of a state maybe where they were thinking, oh, my rent's covered, I'm going to hang out here longer, and won't join the workforce. And then when that's pulled, they just go back into
Yeah, and I'm
street
sure
life.
that there's probably, like anything, I'm sure there's a lot of different explanations, but the key findings seem to be that when you ask people to contribute to their own future, they're less likely to mess up.
Yeah.
So that's what we did this first year. So some of our programs are not taking new applicants, but we will, by the time this grant cycle runs out, we will have spent as a community about $300,000
Right.
and we are going to house somewhere between 200 and 250 people. That is a big number. That's above the national
So somebody's
average.
going to do the math and say, per capita, this is the
Yeah,
cost.
here's what you housed. You know, there were a couple of big housing things that went on this year that were like the Housing 360 and the community solutions, where communities were trying to house 1% of their homeless population a month. Well, we're going to be pretty close to housing 25 to 30% of our homeless population.
That's a good success
in 1 year.
rate.
That's a good number.
Yeah.
That's,
For 1 year, that's progress you could point to.
It's twice the national average.
Yeah.
And it is a good number. Now, can we replicate that next year? I don't think so, because, you know, what we did is we took a population of maybe 600 people and we cherry-picked the population that actually had jobs.
Yeah.
You know, so the group that doesn't have an income, you know, we've worked with them and we have some other things underway, but, you know, you can't put that person in a rental assistance program because at month 6 they don't have a job, you know, they're done.
Yeah.
So we did, on the other hand, have quite a few people that are still on the waiting list to get into our programs. So we're really excited about rental assistance, tenant-based rental assistance, or rapid rehousing that goes by both names. We will probably have most of that money coming in next year.
And is that in the form of federal grant?
It's federal grants or
'Cause United
runs through
Way,
the state.
there's a huge giving campaign too.
That campaign,
small donations seem to add up.
They do, and that's not really, these rapid rehousing programs they are more federal housing programs that run through the Housing and Urban Development Department.
Yeah.
United Way raises about $1.1 million. That gets doled out to about 20 to 21 different organizations, and they have their own goals that's kind of run in line with the United Way goals. We do have people that are contributing with making it specific to reaching home, but in terms of housing programs, you got to have a lot of money to house people, and you got to be super creative. So one other really amazing, great development this year was that over the last couple of years, we've seen the formation of a group called the Missoula Interfaith Collaborative, and that is a bunch of churches that have come together under the leadership of Casey Dunning, who was a master's of social work student here a few years ago, and this was his project. I'm going to get these churches together, and we're going to harness the power, the faith power. So churches have always been a great source of resources in the community, and kind-hearted and helpful and stuff. I think they would admit that over time they maybe have not made the best use of their money, because oftentimes the way they give their money is kind of random. Let's say Joe Schmo, your parishioner, is down at the Albertsons. He sees somebody sitting out there with a sign.
Right.
The guy tells him a sad story. He goes back and tells the minister, the pastor, whatever, hey, I met this guy, he needs some help. The church doesn't really have a vetting protocol, so they don't run the guy's record or even ask him 20 questions. They say, well, we'll just give you $250. Well, maybe they got some value out of their $250, and maybe their $250, maybe they got gamed. Yeah. So what the Interfaith Collaborative has done is put these churches together and said, let's really look at who we're giving money to and make sure that it's somebody that we're going to get some bang for the buck for. Well, I'm super happy to report that they have housed almost 40 people in 1 year.
Yeah.
At the Interfaith
and it is what you might call a triage, right? It's a train wreck anyway.
It is.
If somebody's hanging out trying to game someone for money that they may use on alcohol or drugs, and they're just living on the street and they have one foot in the door of crime, that's not a great success either. But what you're looking for are people that just need a push into self-sufficiency, into a sort of independence, which the society at large holds in high standard.
Yeah, and
you're confronted with someone and say they're never going to earn a penny in their life. They have a subnormal IQ, or they're on the autistic spectrum. Nobody will hire them because they can't get along with anyone. Then you think, all right, that's less exciting than someone that can get that job and work their, up the ladder of success.
And so it's great that what we're doing is we are identifying, I think, pretty well people that just need the helping push.
Yeah.
But as we do that, we find these other people, and some of them fit some of the categories that you were talking about. They're either chronically addicted, or they're desperately mentally ill, or there could be
unemployable for a wide variety of reasons. Yeah.
The interesting thing about that population is those people are not, as a group, you can't just say they're beyond help.
Yeah.
Because in that group, you're going to have veterans with PTSD. You're going to have people with undiagnosed and untreated mental health conditions. Some of those people, if you get in there and really mix it up with them, they will come over. So Travis Mateer, he heads up the Poverillo's HOT team, homeless outreach team. Travis spends every day of his working life out on the streets with Missoula's sort of downtown reserve street homeless population. So he knows these people, and they know him. And last year, Travis was able, by working month after month and day after day with people, to bring 6 people in who really were troubled and get them housed. Now, you can sit out there in Missoula and say, well, 6 people, who cares? Let me tell you what, 6 people living on the street can cost us as much as $50,000 to $60,000 a person.
Yeah, because you think every time that fire truck comes downtown to resuscitate somebody.
You think about the fire truck, the cop car,
Yeah.
the Missoula emergency
The
services.
EMT, and
You
then
think
over to
about
St.
going to
Pat's.
St. Pat's.
Yeah.
You know, we got guys that have gone to the hospital more than 100 times in 365 days.
Wow.
You can imagine what their bill looks like.
Yeah, yeah.
And you can imagine who's not paying it.
Right.
So,
And there are costs on the way other side, you know. I can imagine people watching this program saying, well, those guys, you know, the ones that get drunk and passed out and they cause all this trouble, our humanity doesn't really allow us to ignore them. So what's the cost of ignoring them and saying, well, we'll let them die on the street? That's an extraordinarily high cost to the society at large. Like if you lived in a culture that actually allowed people to die because they were not fit enough to fend for themselves, that's an extraordinarily high cost.
I think
if you know what I
I
mean.
think we have a sliver of one political party that would say that that's a fine outcome.
An acceptable cost.
And it's not. And
It isn't when you really do it. I mean, I'll use for the viewers and for you an example, like I had this old cat. And people would say, well, kill the cat. You know, the cat's
Right.
20 years old. The cat's kidneys are failing. It's peeing on everything.
Yeah.
It's time to kill the cat. Well, you know, and a friend of mine said, well, you know, if that were my cat, you know, I'd just get out the shovel, put it in the yard, get out the shovel, and wham, that would be the end
put
of
it
the
in a
cat.
bag of bricks and throw it in the river.
There's a cost to that, though. You know, so I'm saying
There's a psychic cost.
there
to
is
that.
a psychic cost to that, which could be much more dear than the tens of thousands of dollars, you know, somebody would say, oh, I'd like to save. Just as you mentioned, there could be a handful of individuals that are taken to St. Pat's because they're in danger of losing their lives because they're so intoxicated. And they do that not once, but maybe 100
Every
times in a
day.
year. There's a cost to just killing them because they're irritating.
Yeah. Well, and I think I think it's easy to say
Or to let them die.
what your friends have said. Just
Yeah,
kill
yeah,
your
just
cat.
kill the cat.
You know, just
have done with it.
Be
Dig a
over
hole.
and done with it.
Yeah.
Yet, as a community, I think if we said, just let them die.
Yeah.
And then one of them actually does die.
Right.
it's
Which has
not-
happened
it's
on
not,
occasion.
It doesn't go over well.
Yeah. In the minus 20 degrees.
Yeah.
I
And
don't
so,
know how many.
you know, where my job is, that's not acceptable.
Right.
So, but it is acceptable to look and use your term triage, like how do we best spend our money, but then how do we also look at that group of people and say, even within that small subset of people that are living on the street, there's diversity in that subset.
Right.
There's the guy that's going to tell you to booger off when you go to try to talk to him. He might be doing that because he's defensive and mentally ill. He might be doing that because he's a rude jerk.
Right.
So it takes a long time, and it takes time, like people like Travis being on the street and learning.
actually getting to know the population.
Who is this guy?
Yeah.
And, you know, I spent some time out there. The PATH program at Western Montana Mental Health is a street outreach program. They spend time with these people. So we get a sense of, like, here's a place I'm willing to gamble on that guy.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to talk to him every week because he might come in. So when they come in, you might think, well, man, you spent 40 days working with that guy. Well, guess what? When I got him off the street, I just saved us as a community 60 grand.
Yeah.
Well, so we spend 50% of all of our homeless dollars on 10% of the population. So it pays for us to decide which part of that population can we really serve and get them off the streets and spend that money on better things. And then, and this is going to be an area where the plan is going in the second and third years, is, you know, nobody's happy that we have downtown, that we have these guys that are chronically
Yeah,
inebriated.
and I'm still wondering, you know, what's the impact of the POV having moved to West Broadway
Yeah, and I
on
think-
that situation? I
I
don't
think
know.
we'll have to wait and see about
Yeah.
that. I had
springtime and whatnot.
I had coffee today with somebody who lives down in an apartment fairly close to the POV, and she said, you know, I've seen quite a bit more foot traffic, but I haven't seen anything that would be disturbing. You know, I just see people going from this area to that area. Yeah. So I think we'll see. I don't think the effect of the POV is going to be near the sort of negative that people thought it might be.
Yeah, for the
in part
school.
because it's well designed, it's well arranged. Most people who are homeless that are going to go to the POV that are on foot, they got sort of a historic traffic pattern, and they're not walking through West Side neighborhoods to get here. Now, they might be going to Little McCormick Park where people have always gone.
Yeah,
they
have.
might be going to the Union Gospel Mission, where
right
people
there.
have always gone.
Yep.
That shouldn't become a surprise to anybody. But this group as a population, when they commit acts that are illegal, crimes or just ordinance violations, those things, they're not preying on the general public. If they're violent toward one another. They're not picking kids up at school grounds and stuff like that. I mean, if they're violating something, it's probably, they're drinking publicly when they're not supposed to.
Yeah.
They're peeing on the sidewalk when they're not supposed to.
We've heard a lot of that around.
They're passing out, when they're not supposed to.
Yeah.
I don't think those are going to be things that we're going to see at the POV, in part because they're not taking drunk people.
Yeah.
So, which leads me to my next discussion. This group of people downtown, the group of people that's camped and hardcore on the Kim Williams Trail, the people that are hardcore at the North Reserve homeless camp.
Right.
As a community, we've said that group of people is a problem. Now, I'd stick by what I said before. There's some diversity in that population. There's probably some of those people that we can get them off the street and actually help them with mental health treatment, or they want to go to alcohol addiction, or whatever it is. We can help them with that. There's a group of those people, though, that they're going to keep drinking, and we can do a couple of things. We can, become magicians and hope that they just magically show up in Spokane one day, which has been the recommendation of some people downtown.
Yeah.
We can ignore them and have them constantly in our face and have people say, well, I don't go out the Kim Williams Trail anymore.
Yeah.
Or
I don't go downtown. I can't find parking and I'm harassed
I'm not
for change.
going to the Red Rooster because it's close to the Ox.
Yeah.
Or whatever it happens to be. Or we can try to find a way to put as many of those people as we can inside. So this is something that's happened across the country. It's called harm reduction housing or permanent supportive housing.
Interesting.
So
this is an alternative of POB being a dry facility, no alcohol allowed.
This would be a wet facility.
Right.
So this is a place where there's rules and there's behavior and stuff. You can't just be a roving disaster or a daily train wreck. But what we don't want you drunk on the sidewalk, passed out, getting picked up by the cops and getting taken to the hospital or the jail. Right. Because the hospital and the jail are not appropriate places for you to be.
And they're extraordinarily expensive, as you pointed out, too.
So what we want to have eventually, and the 10-year plan posited this at sort of the 5 to 10-year zone, but we've had enough discussion here over the last year of the downtown population that I think downtown is ready for a solution, and I really think the community is sort of ready for a solution. And we've got enough data watching other communities now, and so what they do is they build what they call harm reduction housing, and you learn your population, you look downtown and say, how many people would we possibly get to come in?
Yeah.
So in Missoula, it looks between like 10 and 20 people who are just this chronically inebriated, but most of them have Social Security disability.
Yeah.
They have some sort of payment source.
And they have family members, too, probably that form a little bit of an anchor.
But, if we brought them in, we could get some of that money to pay rent on the building. So we are going to look here, and we don't know where it would be, and we have, we've talked with a couple of people that can help us move forward with bringing it through sort of the planning stages and getting the financing, most of which would probably be a tax credit, federal tax credit financing. So
I'm beginning to see, too, what you're talking about in terms of trying to bring all the great minds to bear on the problem, because I remember when the church right across from the city downtown campus became the wet facility, and maybe they called it, the fellow that was killed on the California Street Bridge, Salcedo. They called it that, the memorial, Salcedo Memorial, and it came to grief because there were just too many outlying or aberrant behaviors. They couldn't take it and got shut down. But it seemed like maybe they were not in a position that your group may be in. They don't have all of the knowledge and resources.
Well, that was a program that the POV wanted to run, and I think they were responding to the community need, and they didn't have sufficient resources to make it work. But that was letting the POV do this on its own. And the fact is, hey, everybody, nobody's doing this on their own.
Right.
If we don't get together and have a little, kumbaya hand-holding thing, we're not going to get over this one. So what we have now is we've got a lot of people that would be involved. The Poverello would have some involvement, places like Partnership Health, potentially places like Western Montana Mental Health. You might have a wide variety of people. Law enforcement obviously be a great partner.
Sure.
So what we're looking at is creating a building that would do two different things. One, so you used the word SRO a little while ago, single room occupancy.
Yeah.
So what you're going to do is you're going to have what amounts to like a hotel room that a guy is in, and that's his apartment. And what goes on in there will have some rules, but he can be there, he can be drunk, and we are going to, and this is what a lot of communities have done, they basically work with 3 basic questions for these people. Do you want to get sober today? Do you want to get mental health treatment today? Can you stay alive till tomorrow?
Yeah.
And you're looking for at least one yes.
On one of those. Well, it's an interesting discussion. And I know this is a pretty facile type observation. It was on Facebook. Discover the mystery of addiction is isolation. And I don't know, the author, had done a number of surveys, of psychological literature on addiction. One of them was always involving like the rat that could have like regular water or heroin water, right?
Right.
And so, well, that study was always done in isolation. The rat was kept alone in a cage, and that rat took the heroin water till it died. So they did another study where they had rats, like in their little rat families.
Right.
And
interact.
The number, you're right, and the number of rats that were in this like tight family unit took advantage of the heroin water a little, but never enough to kill themselves and never enough to interfere with their ordinary functioning.
Right.
So, it was a kind of a shorthand way of saying a lot of people get incredibly isolated in alcohol. So what do? Is that you isolate them and throw them in jail so they're totally alone, and then they come out.
Yeah, so the research that's coming out of these facilities is really heartening. So one, you've taken the person off the street. So A, they're not going to the hospital.
Right.
They're not getting picked up by the cops. Now, will we still have a few people that do that? Yes. Will everybody go into a shelter facility like this? No. But communities have had different responses to those people. So at that point, we will have offered you everything.
Yeah.
And you've told us, I don't want your help.
Right.
Well, we may not be quite as forgiving of some of your flaws after that. Communities have gotten a little tougher with that group.
Yeah.
Because the person has basically said, I don't want help. I'm committed to being a problem.
Right.
I don't think that's who most people are, though. I think when they get a chance to come inside, to not be on the sidewalk at night.
And to be offered those questions
to not be
each day.
Yeah. And so what communities see really quickly is like in the first year, a 40% decline in emergency room admissions, a 30% decline in cop calls to this population. A lot of different changes. And they also see, Seattle's program, their guys were averaging 20 drinks a day when they came in. That was an average.
Well, yeah.
And at the end of 1 year, they were averaging 9.
Much more manageable.
Yeah, so you may not think that's a big deal, but that person is probably having a lot better quality life. And because they're not on the street, those 20 drinks a day was putting that dude in the hospital and the jail pretty regularly.
Right, and there's the economic trade-off, right?
So we're housing this guy probably at a cost of between $8,000 and $10,000 a year. If we leave him on the street, he costs us $50,000.
Yeah.
So what's the better choice there?
Right.
Putting them inside. And we know we're going to get the argument that like you're enabling them to drink. We get that. I guess we would have to say,
yeah,
you're
we
right.
are.
What we're trying to do is limit the harm that he does to himself. And then we talked about psychic harm. There's a harm to the community of people saying, I don't want to go to downtown Missoula.
Yeah, sure.
I don't want to go on the Kim Williams Trail. Well, dang, that's bad, because the Kim Williams Trail is one awesome resource. And everybody that wants to ought to be able to ride their bike out the Kim Williams Trail and go down there and fish in the river or hike up the hill and not have to encounter a meth camp
being
cooked up on the side of University Mountain, which this summer they could have encountered. And it would have scared the holy Jesus out of
the other
them.
psychic harm it does, of course, too, is it takes a minority of the poor population that now stands for, in the minds of the people, the entire world of this underclass. And
Yeah.
that they're all undeserving and they're all scary and they all want to be
Yeah,
that
and
way.
that makes it really hard to do our job.
Yeah, right. It knocks
'Cause
compassion
what we're
right out
saying
of
is the woman that works at a big box store and is temporarily homeless because her boyfriend left and her kid got sick, she's the same as the guy that's sitting outside a downtown place panhandling so he can drink.
Right.
Those people are as different as you and I,
Well, sure.
and as different as anybody in this community.
Yeah.
But
they become the face of the
we do
poor
a
because
disservice.
they're right there and they're interacting like, hey, buddy, that's a nice sweater. Give me a quarter. You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's, we do a disservice to both them and us when we treat people that way.
Yeah.
So this is going to be probably a 2 to 3 year project, and obviously, like we've done with every other thing in the community, we'll take it out into the community and we'll vet it, and I'm sure that there'll be a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth, and
Right. Because of the enabling, because of the
because of the
endorsing
enabling,
of
because
alcohol.
where do you put it?
Yeah.
I've had a number of downtown
Whoa,
people
yeah,
say,
I didn't think of that.
well, I realize that it's probably great if it's downtown, but how about downtown Spokane or San Diego? And I get that because...
Or up at the peace sign.
Yeah,
or
but
something.
the fact is, the problem is it's down there right now, and it's on the Kim Williams Trail, and it has to go somewhere, and you can't create a situation where you can't put it in the boondocks because nobody's going to get to
No,
it.
yeah, then it wouldn't work at all.
But I think the thing I've always liked about Missoula is that we may have to knock our head on the same wall a few times, but people are going to rise to the challenge of something, and eventually we're going to get it done. That doesn't mean I think that we're going to fulfill the ultimate promise of the 10-year plan, ending homelessness, because we're not going to end joblessness or income inequality or poverty.
Or the fickle hand of fate.
Yeah, the fickle hand, just bad luck. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't put on our suit of armor.
Yeah, and
like
the best
Don Quixote, attack some windmills.
Right.
I mean, give it a go. I tell people all the time, we can end homelessness one person at a time, one family at a time. And somebody in this town has done that almost every day this year that we've gone to work. And this is, this I think is a tough population to work with. And I think if we can fashion a solution for this population, we can fix most of our other problems.
And that's a big step. So people should look for more news about HRH, harm reduction housing.
Yep, it'll definitely over the next year or so. It's going to be a very interesting.
And it kind
topic.
it doesn't condemn or shy away from addiction. It tries to work through addiction with addiction.
Yeah, I mean we're kind of suspending our judgment. Here, if you want to get addiction treatment, by goodness, we will have it for you. But if you don't, and you're willing to stay inside and not be a problem, we're gonna have a place for you to live. And if you have an income stream, we're gonna tap it so you can help us pay for your cost.
Which is really great too, because otherwise the income stream would just go to SROs.
I gave a talk here a couple of weeks ago and got promptly attacked by a guy saying, "You're just giving these people anything. You're not making them do anything. They don't have to be responsible for anything." I'm like, well, A, you're wrong, but B, the fact is, even if I were doing that, that might still be smart because. To leave that person to his own devices, he's costing the community, all of us, way more than if we gave him everything.
Yeah. I mean, I think I kind of agree with you that it's difficult, and I think I brought it up before, to toe that line. I don't think anyone seriously would endorse it to say, well, if they are to die, let them do it. I mean, it's almost like you're quoting a Christmas Carol, right? With Tiny Tim.
I would invite
turning out to be, this is the face of the poor you didn't know existed.
I would invite the people that say that to, when the person's ready to die, we'll bring them to your house.
Yeah, right. You can hit them with the shovel.
You can let them
like
die
my
on your
cat
watch
in the yard.
and see how you feel like that.
Right.
Or I'll hand you my cat in a bag of rocks.
You're right, because it's a kind of grandstanding where it's like, well, let them just die because that's all they're good for.
And the good
but
thing
it's
is,
not a genuine remark.
No, and the good thing is that at the argument for doing what we're doing, it's obviously the morally right argument to help people. But in this case, it's the economically right thing to do here. So even the person who can't say, I care about that person.
Yeah.
I care about the drunk guy that's going to give me the finger.
Right.
Okay, you don't got to say that. But what you do have to say is it's dumb to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars to deal with people who are drunk and not changing instead of putting them inside for hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody could go to economics class and come out and say, hey, that's an awesome choice. And so what I would like to do is justify my moral response by paying a lot more for it.
Yeah. Or seeing,
That's dumb.
the correctional institution.
I mean, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'd like to be wrong, and then I'd like to pay more for it.
And because it comes to that bottom line, the humanity of society.
Yeah.
If somebody goes down on the street, and I'm a terrible one that way, I always call 911. Like, even people say, oh, they're just going to sleep it off.
Yeah,
I don't want to take that chance.
You're costing us money.
I do.
Because he's probably going to sleep it off.
Because I can't just walk past the body. I can't do it.
I think most people can't. And, your response is actually codified in state law.
Oh.
I mean, if the cops respond, they can't just walk off. They have to do something with them. So what they do in the current situation is neither choice is good.
Yeah.
They're both economically bad choices. And in the end, they're not even the person hasn't really committed a jailable offense, and the person doesn't have a diagnosable thing that would have them go to the hospital. Now, when they get there, sure enough, they may have something diagnosable, but that's not the reason we took them there, because they're laying there with cancer or because their spleen burst or something. They're just there because they passed out.
Right. And it's the call of humanity that most people can't deny. They want to take care
with a
of the most
facility that
vulnerable.
provides harm reduction housing, but also provides 24/7 shelter, just like get you out of the weather, it's 25 below zero.
Yeah.
And, we had that stretch of weather last year. And
it came even in the fall.
Yeah, that was my
25.
first year as the Reaching Home person. And, so I knew Travis was working hard with the outreach team trying to get people to come in.
Yeah.
And I knew the PATH program was out on the street trying to get people to come in. And I thought, Michael, geez, you've been a mountaineer, an ice climber, you got all this stuff. You need to get out there and talk some people into coming in. And if they won't come in, you need to help them out in some way.
Yeah.
So I went out there and I saw people in all sorts of situations. And some of them were just, they didn't want to not come in because they were contrary. But I encountered two people that were, badly mentally ill.
Yeah.
And
they just didn't realize the danger of what was going on.
Or even if they could, they were more afraid of submitting to authority than they were of minus 25 degrees.
Yeah.
So a couple of those people, I talked in, Travis talked in a bunch of people, and the PATH program people got some people inside. But one guy in particular, I gave him my 0-degree sleeping bag.
Wow, you really are a newbie.
And I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to sleep in this.
Right.
I want you to not die. And when it gets back above 0, I want you to get my sleeping bag back.
Oh, okay, you're not a total newbie.
No,
you wanted it back.
No, and and I knew where he was.
Yeah.
I knew where he was sleeping every day. And I went back and I said, so how'd that bag work for you? And he said, I didn't even know they made things like this. And this thing's unbelievable.
Yeah, super high tech.
Yeah. And obviously you got to give it back to me here for a while. But the fact is there's a lot of just different solutions that we can come up with people.
And people don't realize what you're asking people to do. You have people that are very mentally ill. They might have an enormous amount of social anxiety. And they say, go in this room filled with strangers and eat at this table and they'll find a place for you to sleep. And they're like, well, I'm not going to do that.
The outcome for that person's going to be terrible.
Yeah.
And unless we have we implement some miracle fix on them in a short period of time, they're going to be less likely to come in the next time because they're probably not going to have a great experience.
Right.
Not because we didn't try to give them
No.
one, but because they're not in the headspace to do it yet.
You think of how many times you're supposed to go to a party and you think, I just want to stay home. I don't want the social excitement. But Scott's standing up. How much time on an hour?
5 minutes?
6.
6 minutes.
You're saying we got 6 minutes left on an hour.
I tell people all the time I can talk for 5 minutes or
15 minutes.
whatever,
See?
whatever.
It's kind of, but I don't feel the fatigue from talking about this. I could talk about this all day, too.
Yeah, I know there's some people that would feel fatigued with me talking about it.
Yeah, well, they probably already changed the channel.
So I'll tell you one other thing that came up that was really interesting this year from a homeless perspective. And this is an area where we didn't have our magic crystal ball out. So about midway through last year, there was a couple trailer courts that are kind of on the other side, the south side of 3rd Street from the Good Food Store.
Oh, yeah, you were telling me about
this. And those properties were bought for development. And part of it was bought for a commercial development of a auto parts store. And then the other part was bought by somebody that wanted to build, higher income housing that's on the place.
Then trailer.
Yeah, so we had a couple of historic trailer parks there. Obviously they're serving a population that is on probably fixed income for the most part, maybe no incomes for some part. Yeah. They're charging them very little money, $300, $285. They are grandfathered in with really old trailers. Some of these trailers had not been moved for years, and actually when we got the skirting off of them, some of them, the tires were gone. And
they had just disintegrated.
Yeah, they just disintegrated. They just sitting there on the rims. So what happened is, that there was a property management company there that had been running the place for a while, but essentially they had to deliver the news to these people is that in X number of months, you got to go.
And what we call gentrification in a way. Like when you think about the way that neighborhood was around Good Food Store, before it became the Good Food Store, which is an enormous symbol of gentrification in a way. It was just all casual. You go over to the T&C lounge, you're in the trailer.
And the trailer park,
and that was the country.
And the trailer park fit right in.
It did.
When I came here 35 years ago, there weren't that many things out there past
it was kind of the countryside. And,
you got past the T&C or Gillies maybe, and that was the end of town.
Right.
But so these people, a lot of them had been living there for a long, long time. Yeah. They were suddenly faced with being pushed into either a rental market where their entire Social Security disability check would not buy them a one-bedroom apartment, or they needed to relocate their trailer. So that's something that as a community we really hadn't given much thought to, is like, okay, we got a lot of places where people are living with very low incomes. And Missoula is, we are gentrifying in some neighborhoods. We've seen a lot of changes.
Even
on
the tax base, where council will say, we want this amenity, we want this boulevard, and we want these trees. And the poor people are saying, whoa, wait a minute, we don't need this stuff.
Special improvement district for that? I don't need that.
Right. It's a real tension.
Yeah, so we got this group of people that were like, there's no program that comes out to help people with low incomes, like
relocate.
Find another place to live.
Yeah.
So in part, those people, a lot of them sort of manned up or woe-manned up and said, man, I got to get out there and find myself some shelter.
They were actively working on the problem.
So some people were pretty active, and then some people somehow found my program's name and said, they called. So I helped one guy, and then within about 2 weeks, I had like 7 guys.
Right,
saying,
they want to help.
I heard you help so-and-so. I heard you help so-and-so. So I wound up spending probably a good month, like just working with this group of people. And what I really saw was that, while we do have an identifiable group of people that are homeless and we can kind of semi-count them, we got this huge other population that is on the cusp of being homeless. And so all over Missoula are trailer courts where people are paying $300 and $400.
Yeah, and if that land starts looking more and more attractive to developers.
Those trailer courts, and a lot of times those are like land banks. Yeah. They're sitting on flat property that could be really, really valuable, especially if a place is morphing from being residential to commercial residential, like the 3rd Street Russell area.
Right.
That's becoming much more an industrial, not industrial, but a commercial corridor.
Right. And became, I think, a special improvement district through the MRA.
Yeah,
like
so
it
now,
was.
where we had 15 people living, now we got an AutoZone.
Right.
Because AutoZone wants to be where O'Reilly's is, which is right across the street.
Yeah.
So could that happen here in Missoula again? Yeah, I think next time we'll be more prepared for it. I want to give a special shout out to Missoula Property Management. They were the manager on this property, and they really stepped into the fray and offered these people some financial incentives to move by a certain date. So, it helped them to get them out. But I guarantee you, they offered people hundreds of dollars to move. And that money often was what it took me to say to a guy with a moving company, hey, we can afford your moving expenses to get these people moving out. One of the things, again, we'd had never seen it coming, but is it likely to happen again? Yeah.
Interesting. When you come back, we have to talk about that gentrification issue, man.
Yeah, there's so many interesting things going on in this area, and like Missoula always does, it's amazing how people have risen to the challenge. 200 people come out on a Friday and give up their work day to do this stuff. But we got people everywhere. Churches getting together, cross dominations. I mean, the Interfaith Collaborative has got Buddhists and Presbyterians and the Mormon Church.
Methodists.
Everybody's
obviously.
in. Everybody's in and recognizing that we have some problems, and these are going to be tough challenges ahead. People would like this downtown problem to just magically go poof and
not
be
easily.
Here. It's not going to. It's not going to go poof.
Yeah.
It's going to be hard.
Michael, I guess we better go so we have around hour, but I want to thank you for spending the time.
Well, and thanks for having me.
You know it. So, viewers, if you want to learn more about it, you can Google United Way of Missoula and then click on that tab, Reaching Home, where you can look at the progress of Missoula's 10-year plan to end homelessness. Well, thanks for watching this special edition of Missoula Live. For MCAT, I'm Joel Baird. I'll see you the next time.